Hello everyone, in this video we'll be talking about clearance sacrifice, okay? So clearance sacrifice, what does that mean? So there will be times in your games where you'll be able to sacrifice one of your pieces to gain material or to actually give a checkmate, okay? Those are the two most common examples. I think the only two examples, really. So we'll go ahead and look at this position here, okay? So this position here, we can notice that we have a battery of queen and rook, and then we have another rook here. In this position, we're down a minor piece, so we might be thinking, oh, we're losing here, right? So we're losing because we have a bishop, we have two rooks, and we have a queen. They have a queen, they have a bishop and a knight, and then the two rooks. But here we're totally winning if we're able to find a clearance sacrifice here. And the move, what do you think? So you can actually pause the video here, okay? Try to pause the video, try to find it for yourself. And here we can like see that there's a battery going on. If ideally, if you were able to put one of your pieces in one of the squares, what would it be? So ideally it would be to swap the places between the queen and the rook, right? Because like if the queen was here instead of the rook here, that would just be a checkmate, right? So that's the idea. That's the idea. You can think about it like that. Where can I put my pieces? Okay, how can I do it? Are there any forceful lines? And here we can always look into checks, captures, attacks, just like our checklist that we use for our exercises. But yes, here, if we're able to sacrifice just the rook here, that wouldn't be appropriate, right? That wouldn't be accurate, because if we're able to sacrifice the rook here, they can just capture us back like this, and the knight is defending the rook. So like then you're gonna lose a lot of material here probably with all these traits, and now you're totally losing, right? Because you have a bishop and a queen versus a queen, a knight, a bishop, a rook, like the whole soup, right? So ideally here, that sacrifice, it doesn't really work here. But we have another sacrifice, right? We have rook h7 check. Rook h7 check has two responses. And it's very forceful because the king cannot move to the side because the queen is covering here the whole file, and they just have to capture either with the knight or with the king. Both ways lose kind of equally, right? So if they were to capture with the knight, remember, now we can actually replace the rook that we had here on g7 with the queen, and that would just be a checkmate, you know? Everything's blocked here. Same idea if they capture with the king. Now we have the g7 square again. And that we just did a clearance sacrifice because we said, you know what, we have checkmate. If we can bring the queen to g7, we win the game. So here, very forceful, boom, you just get rid of the rook, and then you can just give a checkmate to your opponent. Okay, let's go ahead to the second example. For this second position here, we can think of, again, clearance sacrifices and how to do it, right? So here, for example, the first thing that we might be thinking in this position is like, okay, checks, captures, attacks, any checks, and the obvious check that we have here is just pawn takes on g5, right? Pawn takes on g5, and you might be thinking, oh, they can grab with a knight and everything, and then, you know, you can give a check, and they have to run, and then you give a check, and you win the knight and everything, and things like that. But keep in mind, they don't have to capture back, right? So just because there's a check, it doesn't mean that they have to take. Like, most likely they'll probably just like run to g7, and they're totally fine. There's nothing else forceful here. You know, if you want to like bring your rook or something to give some checks, they can just try to run away. Just forget about that pawn, right? You know, so they can try to find plays like that. But we have to be precise, right? Whenever we're playing, we need to think of, okay, I want my opponent to play that move. If they don't play that move, I'm just gonna like stop playing, you know, because like they're playing with the engine or something. No, we shouldn't go like that. Sometimes we hang on too much to our queen, but we're probably missing these beautiful sacrifices and beautiful checkmates, right? That are very forceful. For example, in this position, we saw that the pawn thing didn't really work. I mean, it might work at one point, but not super clear. Okay, but here we can actually go ahead and we can see, okay, some pawns are covering these squares, and at one point I can bring my knight here with some check, and bringing the knight here can actually cover g7. So there are some ideas, you know, this pawn is very nice. We're covering a bunch of squares here, and we have a bishop here. So we can go ahead with the move queen takes g5. Brilliant move, I would think, right? So like the king cannot capture, and there's nowhere else for the king to go, and it's forced for them to take with a knight, right? So here we can probably think of like any checks and stuff, but there's some escape squares. They can always go like, you know, g6 and then try to run away. But here we have to keep in mind again. We reassess the position. Now it's here. Any other checks? Do we have checks again? We do. We actually have knight f5 check. And remember that we were saying that the knight here actually covers g7 and it doesn't allow the king to run away, right? So only move for the king, g6. And we just finish the game by bringing the pawn to h5, providing a good, beautiful checkmate here to the black king. The black king cannot move anywhere. The knight's covering these key squares, you know, and the knight here was just protecting the king before by taking the queen, but then now it's blocking the king, even though the bishop was here. The bishop was here covering that diagonal. But we can find beautiful things like this with clear and sacrifice. In this case, we used our queen to cover some squares from the king and make everything uncomfortable for them. So in this third position, we can also think of clear and sacrifices. And clear and sacrifice doesn't always mean that we have to sacrifice a minor piece, a heavy piece, a queen, to just give checkmate all the time. Sometimes it's just to gain an advantage, win some material of some sort, or get a better position, right? So here we're not getting too crazy or too excited, like trying to sacrifice a knight or a rook or our queen here, right? But we can also think of making things uncomfortable right now. So we can see that the queen is looking at the rook here. If the rook were to come to c8, we can always just grab it and win a piece like that, right? But we can also think of like what would be an ideal square for our knight, for example. Our knight is very well centralized, right? But they can always just take it, and we would just, you know, have a pawn island there, and then our knight is not strong anymore. But here we can also think of the b4 square. B4 square, if we were to like just put the knight, grab it and just put in an ideal square, we put it on b4, that would be a triple fork here situation, like very, very nice fork, right? So how can we achieve that? We can do it by bringing the pawn to b3. Okay, so here there are a few responses, right? Like, what if they just grab it with the queen? If they grab it with the queen, remember the rook. Now the rook is just hanging. It's just like free rook, no problem, I'll take it. So in this case, they would probably grab it with the bishop, right? If they take it with the bishop, now we have the b4 square ready for our knight. We have a whole like fork situation here. Very good stuff. If we were to move the queen somewhere, now we can even just like take this rook here. Very forceful. Like if they take back, now we're up material. We're up a whole piece here, right? So you can take it with the queen. You can take it with a knight if you want to keep them like, if you want to keep the queens on the board. But here, if you are up a piece, might as well just try to get rid of their queen, right? So that's the whole point. We're winning here. So in this position, we sacrifice a pawn, clear and sacrifice to give a fork situation and be able to win a heavy piece in this case, right? Okay, so let's move on to the next one. For this fourth position, we can still keep in mind the clear and sacrifices, okay? So for clear and sacrifices, you can always think of, if you were to grab a piece and pull it off the board and put it somewhere in an ideal square, the best square, what piece would it be and where would you put it? Okay, so for example, we can think here that if we were to swap the knight and the queen, if we have the knight here where the queen is on e6, we would just give a royal fork. We would give a fork to the king, to the rook, to the queen, and to the bishop. And if we give the fork here, we can actually give a free queen here, you know, with a check and everything. So that's pretty good. So if we're able to swap this and bring the knight to e4, we can think about it like that, right? It's like, okay, I'm gonna win the queen if I have my knight here. So, and we can evaluate the position currently. Right now we have two rooks, we have a knight, and they have a rook, a knight, two bishops, and a queen. Okay, so we're down a piece actually, but they have two minor pieces for a rook. So here we have to find the nice move, queen takes f5. Queen takes f5. Yes, we're getting rid of our queen. They can just grab it a couple of ways, right? So however way they grab it, like let's say they grab it with the rook. Remember, we cleared the square here for our knight. Now we can bring knight here with knight e6 check. Wherever the king moves, let's say they move here, now you can just take the queen here for free, and now you're even attacking the bishop, right? They would probably go with something like forceful check, and then now you're still attacking the bishop. If they were to move the bishop somewhere, you can even like grab a pawn here or do whatever you want, right? So that's the nice thing about clear and sacrifices. Like, just think about constantly, like, you know, if I were to put like an ideal, like, what's the ideal square for my knight here? there, oh, I can give a fork, and then you know you can just sacrifice your queen to then win their queen, you know, and then you're coming back, you know, you were losing, maybe not so clear, but now you're like, you have an advantage because you have a knight and a rook versus a couple of bishops, you know, so you should be able to probably win. Still not super clear, but you have to play chess, and things like that, right? So like this move again, very nice, very nice move, attacking everything, and then you should be able to win here. Hopefully, you still need to convert. You need to not get too excited. You know, you need to play solid, and you should be able to hopefully win after this. But I hope you gain some insight, some knowledge from this. Very useful concepts, and keep this in mind for your games, because if you go back to like checking out your games, you might notice that, oh, you had these opportunities, you know, but now the thing about this is like our brain is trying to adopt new patterns, new plays, new things, new forms of things, and then once you're exposed to these things, then your brain will be, oh, I'm able to recognize it right away, right? So we need to expose ourselves to this like multiple patterns and things like that, because then we'll get used to seeing these things, and we'll be like, oh, I recognize this, you know, I can actually, I'm winning this position or whatever, you know. So keep that in mind. Be patient on your games. Play slow. Take your time. Calculate, and don't just calculate and hope for your opponent to just fall for your traps. But try to think and play against your opponent, like against their best responses. Okay. So I'll see you guys on the next video.